Hello, everyone. Thank you, Asti. It gives me great pleasure to open today's event, which is on a very, very timely topic. But before we begin, I would just like to introduce the Professional Women's Group to those of you who are joining the BritCham events for the first time. Our women's group has been in existence for more than 10 years, and I've been part of this group for 10 years and chairwoman for over 4 years. So the BritCham is the only chamber of commerce that has a women's sector group, and we are really humbled and proud to be part of this organization and this association. And all this time we have been doing events offline, but since COVID started, we have had to do online webinars, and we're happy to say that the support continues and people continue to join us as we choose various interesting topics, including this topic, which Chris and I have been holding since March, since COVID started, because we realize that all these sectors must be greatly affected. So this is going to be an exciting event. And if you're wondering why there are men on the panel, because they are the ones who are in the industries that we chose. And to share with you today, we actually have 40% men in our audience participation. So thank you. And we are always open to professionals who can share their expertise and experience in their respective industries with us. So without further ado, I will hand over to Chris, and please, we look forward to your contribution. Please do not hesitate to put your questions in the chat box, and let's make this an informal and fun sharing experience. Thank you. Chris, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Sonny. Do you know, I did not realize it was 10 years. We shall have to have a proper old party, won't we, when we're all able to. I can think of a venue where that might be able to happen, Mr. Abram, eh? Yes, I thought so. A very good afternoon to everybody who's joining us from Indonesia. We do have a few international guests as well, and I'm suspecting further Western Asia, so it's probably good morning to you. It's certainly morning where Ian Roberts is, who joins us. And as Asti has mentioned, Ian joins us as somebody that actually formerly was on the BritCham board, has been in the region since, I believe, the early 2000s, and now finds himself in the UK as Managing Director of Informa Markets, and with particular responsibility for what should have been 31 plus trade events this particular year. It's also a pleasure to introduce Chris Bowden, who comes on here to say hello to a number of you, just as he's about to say goodbye to Indonesia. Chris has been the country manager of Indonesia for Cathay Pacific for the last few years. And we, BritCham as a whole, has enjoyed an excellent relationship with Cathay Pacific. And I think we're in our third year now as Cathay Pacific being our annual airline partner. Andy Abram has been around since, gosh, a long time, 2004 in Indonesia. Had a bit of a break, and we might get round to talking about some of the things that have happened in that break when we compare other countries. And Andy is incumbent as general manager at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, which is part of the Jardines group. And I save the one lady because it's the best till last. Laura, a very warm welcome for you to join us. I think the first time you've been on a panel or taking a profile at a BritCham event. Very, very welcome. Managing Director of Mentari Travel Services. So we have the airline sector, we have the hotel sector, we have the exhibitions sector, and we also have the travel sector as well. Pretty much covered in terms of our title, to open the borders to remain closed. When we started marketing this event, as Sonny mentioned, what we knew was that Bali had announced that it was trying to open its borders to get international tourists back. I think it was either September the 11th or September the 12th. That obviously had to be revisited. We now know that Jakarta is in another version of PSBB, sort of lockdown. Domestic tourism is open. I'm not aware of any physical um, expos that have actually happened during the period from May to now. The airline business has been off for passengers to a large degree, but significantly boosted by the opportunities of goods logistics and so on. And Chris will talk about that. And of course, for a hotel like the Mandarin Oriental based in Jakarta, and Jakarta being a center for a lot of business tourism, there are challenges there. I'd like to begin by simply asking each of our guests to give their own little sort of snapshot or scene setter from the perspective of their own business area within hospitality, and particularly perhaps to contrast where we are now with where they were this time last year. And we'll use that as the platform going forward. We've received a few questions in advance of this particular session. We very much welcome questions from you as we go along. We'll try to introduce as many of them as possible. It's your opportunity to create the interactivity with us. And where there are similar questions, excuses if we do a bit of bundling in the interest of some efficiency. I introduced you last, Laura, but now I'm going to ask you to do the scene setting first, please, in the context of the travel industry.
Okay, I hope you can hear me all right now. Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you, Sony, for organizing this event, which is really done at the right time because we just started with a second lockdown in Jakarta just a couple of days ago. I think when you draw a comparison compared to today and last year, there is a huge difference in the travel industry because in the last 4 or 5 years, at least when I speak from my own experiences, the business was really flourishing and doing absolutely great until even February this year. It was this sudden decline that the virus became known in China and the airlines started to reduce the bookings. People were getting a little bit worried. And then there was this sudden change by mid-March approximately that just the borders started to get closed and everybody started to speak about the pandemic, something that we actually never heard of or probably never expected that something would get so severe. When the virus erupted in January in Wuhan in China, we were just like, oh gosh, this is China. You know, it can happen in China. It's a big country. This is not going to happen to Indonesia or anywhere in the world. So we don't have to be worried. But then starting next March, we had to close our office as well. So I just heard about the digits or the numbers of the Mandarin Hotel, how bad the business is. And we are now back at about 15 to 20% compared to last year. But this is not related to tourism. It's mostly related to just traveling from families that are based in Indonesia and they want to go back home to Europe or any other country just to be reunited for some time. But when it goes to tourism itself, domestic tourism is picking up, but very, very slow. And people just remains afraid to travel. So that's basically just how we look at it on a daily basis. And we are just waiting for the borders to open and waiting for the vaccine to become available. We believe that as soon as a vaccine is available on the market and people get vaccinated, that slowly things will go back to normal, but it's going to take time, definitely.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laura. That's just an excellent bit of background. So back to 15 to 20%, but
Yes.
it's travel only is the message there, and people really not wanting to be mobile. If I could go now, because that perhaps more closely correlates with the airline experience. Chris, if I could bring you in and you could also just do a little bit of scene setting from the perspective of the airline industry coming in and out of Indonesia from the Cathay Pacific point of view.
Sorry, technically figuring out how to unmute. So yeah, I don't think it's much of a secret of how difficult the airline industry worldwide has found COVID. Capacities worldwide have dropped significantly, and Cathay is no exception in that regard. So if I compare back to August 2019 and give you some figures that we can compare against with last month, 2020, Cathay carried just less than 36,000 passengers in August 2020. That's 1.2% of what we carried in August 2019. We had load factors of about 20%, so the planes were around 20% full, and in August 2019 they were 80% full, so a significant drop on the loads there. In Indonesia in particular, we were operating just over 40 flights to Indonesia to 4 destinations: Jakarta, Surabaya, Denpasar, and Medan. And in August 2020, we're flying passengers to Jakarta and cargo flights to Surabaya, but that's a total of 6 flights a week. So again, a significant reduction on where we were. And I'm conscious that this is a very bleak summary, so I've tried to find some positives in here, and there are some. And in the cargo sector, the load factors for cargo are about 14% higher than they were in 2019. So we're carrying more cargo in our planes, but obviously the volume is less, so less flights, less total volume. But that cargo factor is an indication, hopefully, of recovery. So as long as the cargo keeps flowing, that gives us a base on which we can build our passenger operations. And then for Indonesia in particular, Jakarta is one of 25 destinations that we still operate to with passengers around the world, and that's a major reduction worldwide. But Jakarta remains one of our key destinations, key markets, and we're constantly looking at when and where we can increase the frequencies into Indonesia. But yeah, I hope that sets the scene. It's a fairly bleak summary.
Well, thanks for finding at least one silver lining there, Chris. We do appreciate that. Let's boing from. I think you're currently sitting in Hong Kong. Is that right, Chris?
Yes.
Yes. So let's boing from Hong Kong back to Jakarta before we go west to the suburbs outside London. And Andy, your perspective from the Mandarin Oriental.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Sonny. Before I start, I have a little statistic here about the women's group. At Mandarin Oriental, one of our things is to empower women in our leadership. So since 2017, our senior leaders have gone from 34% in the hotel to 50%. So we're going in the right direction there. So for the audience that's questioning all these males on the panel, ladies' power, women's power at Mandarin Oriental. Yes, I mean, I think a similar story, similar thread to my colleagues on the panel. Yeah, we just can't compare 2019 to 2020 in terms of our business. And when we went into lockdown in March, end of March, our occupancies fell to very, very low single digits. And I suppose we had the advantage that some of our properties in China had already gone into lockdown. So we had, the advantage of some processes that we could implement here in Jakarta. The key priority for us and remains for us is the livelihood of our colleagues and protecting that as best we can, but also the integrity of the brand, because we will come out of this one day and somehow, and we want to be ready for the uptick and the upturn. Since March, and as the restrictions were reduced, we did see and have seen the business picking up, so much so that probably this month, if we hadn't gone back into lockdown, we would have probably gone into about 30% occupancy with lower yields, because the international business has virtually dried up. We have had some international groups staying at the hotel, but that is on the back of government permissions. They've come in to do work on behalf of the government. So for us, it's to continue to build the trust in our consumers, in our how we operate the hotel, and I talk on behalf of all Mandarin Oriental properties. With our We Care program, we introduced an independently audited health and hygiene program in all our properties, with another 175 standards to be in place. So it's to protect that and seek opportunities where we can generate revenue, whether it be takeaway business, and also embrace the domestic market, which, as Laura said, is not growing at a huge rate, but it is an important segment for us, whether it's government, local, domestic, corporate market, some diplomatic business. And plan really for 2021, where we also see the first half of the year being particularly soft. And if we see some movement in reducing border restrictions in the middle of next year, some pickup towards the end of 2021, and let's hope back into profit 2022. But that's a bit of a scene setter from the Mandarin Oriental, which we can come back to later. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy. Not such a bad picture, as you said, prior to this latest PSBB reinforcement. Things were starting to move up just a little bit. Ian, you're in the UK. You should have been looking forward to promoting 30 odd events, expos during the course of this year. The nature of what you do is somewhat different to our other panelists, and you actually do have other options and other opportunities to explore. But please share your landscape at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and many thanks, Sonny, for organising this. I think similar to the other panelists, I mean, it's no secret the global events industry has been, hit very hard by this. I mean, anything that the whole purpose is bringing people together, bringing communities together to network, to interact, to do business has obviously been hit very badly. So really, from a global point of view, since March, there's been very little happening in events all over the world. There's a couple of positive spots, which I'll come to, but that's the kind of scene. So, and from an Indonesia point of view, there's really the last trade show in Indonesia was in December of any scale. So really the whole of this year, there has been nothing happening. So our company in Indonesia, PT Pamrindo, has not run any show this year. As I say, on the positive side, from a global point of view, what we've noticed now is two of the biggest events and exhibition countries in the world are China and Germany. China have now been running shows really from September. Of course, they tend to be domestic shows, domestic, the exhibitors are all domestic, and of course, the buyers as well are all domestic. And perhaps this is something where Indonesia can move to as well, because there's a huge domestic economy there, similar to China. Germany is the other big show part in the world. The events industry in Germany is huge, and literally last week was the first show in Germany since March as well. So there's a couple of positive signs. I think the question is then, what have I been doing? So out of those 31 shows, Chris, the first one I should be running will be in November this year, actually in Shanghai. So we've been really looking at what else we can be doing. And whilst some of these events have moved to virtually, so we've tried to do it online, which I think from a content point of view and a knowledge, I mean, let's be honest, people come to events for two main reasons. One is the knowledge and one is the networking. You can replicate the sort of knowledge aspect and the content part, but the networking is really difficult. And this is where we really need the physical events to happen again so people can come back together. But fortunately for Informa, part of our business is in the subscription business and the academic publishing side. We publish a lot of academic work, and some of that is in the pharmaceutical field. So of course that part of the business is doing well. But from an events point of view, it's very, very tough. And I think, to agree with Andy as well, we really don't see things picking up until the sort of middle of next year. So many of our events have been postponed, they've been moved. We were planning Food and Hotel Bali in March this year, that then moved to October. And now again, we've had to cancel that completely now, and that will go back into 2022. So yeah, it's tough at the moment.
Okay, so each of you is saying that it's tough, and I think we know that. Of course, we would all like borders to be opened up, but in most parts of the world they are substantially closed in one form or another. Certainly there are disincentives for people to travel because of the rules and regulations upon return, and so on. Indonesia's borders, to all intents and purposes at the moment, unless you are a resident, either an expatriate on a work permit or an expatriate resident or an Indonesian, Indonesia's borders are to all intents and purposes closed. But I'd like us to explore whether what's going on at the moment is the right approach. Should the borders remain closed? You know, every country in the world, and we see it with the UK, there's a trade-off, isn't there? There's a trade-off between clinically what might be the best approach and with the economic realities that countries cannot continue to subsidize very, very substantially reduced levels of commercial activity and therefore GDP. With regards to Indonesia, what opinions do we have with regards whether the borders should be open or whether they should remain closed? Should Indonesia be bold and perhaps disregarding the flow of other nations, or is Indonesia best taking this very conservative and circumspect view and staying in line with neighbors and other countries around the world? I wonder whether you've got a view on that, Chris, as you're moving people physically around the world.
Yeah, it's a really tricky question, because if I look at it from Hong Kong's perspective, Hong Kong is driving to get 0 cases, and as a result, it enforces really strict restrictions on people arriving in, whereas it appears that somewhere like Indonesia might be taking a different approach, similar to the UK, of managing the virus at a lower level. And I think where the problem comes in is, if Indonesia opens the borders to other countries, it's whether that will be reciprocated. And with the spread of the virus as it is in Indonesia right now, we know that places like Hong Kong have classed Indonesia as high risk and therefore imposed stricter restrictions on them. So it would, from a business perspective, it would be very useful for Indonesia to open its borders. But my concern is well, it's twofold. It's the ability to manage the healthcare element, but then secondly, it's the appetite of other nationals to fly into Indonesia with the virus in the state that it currently is.
So I think that we can sort of read into that it might be something that's desired, but have longer term and much more diverse implications if it was the wrong move too early. Look, Laura, you are obviously very, very keen to keep people moving around. To what extent do you agree with Chris's opinion on this?
Well, I do agree in many ways. The thing is, if you open the borders, if Indonesians are allowed to travel outside of the country again, are they allowed into other countries like Singapore or Malaysia? The problem that Indonesia is facing right now, that the numbers of cases in Jakarta especially are still increasing on a daily basis. And that's why Jakarta governor imposed the second lockdown, the PSBB. So what is going to happen if the borders are going to reopen? For my own personal experience or discussions which I have with people in the industry, is that it is very important that there's actually going to be a vaccine available, that people are going to be vaccinated, that when they travel, you have a health certificate that says that you have a vaccine. And I think then things are going to change slowly. But as long as there's no vaccine available on the market and the numbers of cases are increasing in Indonesia, but also in other countries like India or the Philippines, for instance, which are all three in the red zone in the south, in the Asian region, I think it will be difficult to open the borders, although we badly need it for economic recovery. the longer this is going to last, it's basically that we have to keep our heads above the water financially. We as a travel agency, the hotel, the overhead costs are even bigger. So everybody is running into the losses, and how long can we survive by running into the losses? So that is another question. So it's trading off between health issues and economic issues, and that makes it very, very difficult.
Thanks, Laura. So, and Andy, of course, the hotel business can be regarded as a sort of a barometer, in particular in Jakarta, and in particular among five-star hotels, a barometer of commercial confidence, commercial activity, vibrancy, and so on. We've heard from both Chris and Laura that yeah, we all want the borders open, we want people to come back, but there are going to be implications and consequences to that. How long can businesses like yours sustain in the current environment?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, just referring back to Chris and Laura, I mean, obviously the airlines aren't coming in here, there's no customers coming in here, but I mean, the point that we hear from some of our corporate partners around the globe is this level of trust and confidence in sending people to Indonesia, you know, and that's from the diplomatic segment and the corporate segment. And, you know, Indonesia is seen as a high risk. And I think the only solution, I think we all agree on this, is to source a vaccine to get through this COVID crisis. But in terms of running our business, I mean, we obviously, like every other business, has had to look to our cash burn and reduce all cash activities while still maintaining a level of service to our customers. We've managed to protect the workforce as it is, but anyone that leaves will not be replaced. We've worked with our partners in downsizing all variable costs and contracts and outsourcing in a professional and proper manner by contract. But, you know, so it's not just the hotels that suffer, it's the people that supply us. Their livelihoods are being impacted as well. We are fortunate in that we have wonderful owners and Jardines, and you know, as a brand, Mandarin Oriental is looking to, I would say, late 2021 into 22 before we see things starting to return to anything near normal. But it's for our international traveler, and to see that returning, I think that there's this level of trust in maybe how Indonesia is handling it, you know, that needs to be revisited a bit as well. Yeah. Yeah.
So if we stay with this theme of trust, because I think we've partially addressed a couple of questions that came in ahead of this webinar. One from Junaidal and another from Lilith, referring to the fact that Indonesians are on the one hand banned from 59 countries, and there are various travel warnings relating to Indonesia. I think we would all agree that the statistics are what they are, and therefore you know, Indonesia can't necessarily argue with the actions of other countries in the face of that. Lilith mentions whether there should be, or asks whether there should be some sort of more reciprocity in terms of international relationships. I presume she means by way of permissible travel between countries and so on during the pandemic time. But reciprocity, I think we would agree, relies on there being a level playing field, and a level playing field means that you know, one country and another country are sort of, they've flattened their curve, and they've got control over the growth in the incidence of the virus, which isn't the case at the moment. Ian, parts of the UK at the moment are also threatened with partial or full lockdowns, and the government has made it very, very clear, if it continues, there could be a reversion to the actions taken in May. What levels of trust are there in the UK, and what is the sentiment with regards how the UK is looking at other countries?
Thanks, Chris. I think the trust element, as Andy alludes to, is vital here. And I think you're right. In an ideal world, this reciprocity would work for both countries. I think that in the UK, the element of trust from the British people at the moment, I wouldn't say is particularly high. The tracing system they tried to put in place hasn't worked very well. So I think there's a number of issues here within the UK, and many people were arguing that we should release and we open up the borders a little bit quicker. There has been travel from the UK in certain parts of Europe, but of course what's happened is as and when people are coming back and the cases are going up, that's closed as well now. So actually, even the travel from the UK to parts of Europe now, there's not that many countries that the UK citizens can travel to, and it is getting smaller. And then on top of that, you're right, within the UK, what you're finding is isolated regions and parts of the UK where the cases are going up again, that's then going further into lockdown. I think the biggest problem with the UK at the moment is the tracing system, and also getting tested, which just seems to be a mess. I mean, even if you wanted to get tested at the moment, it's trying to get that done. So I don't think the UK is particularly led by example here. That is for sure. And the trust thing, I think it's a fairly global thing. I think a lot of people are not particularly trusting of the whole procedures around this and the way it's done, but also on reporting of the numbers and what is the real situation in many of these countries.
So if we consider the title of this webinar, To Open Borders to Remain Closed, the UK open borders, and perhaps the correct action in terms of controlling the incidence of the pandemic would have been to remain closed. So got it wrong. I certainly am a great proponent of people being very proportionate in how they view the Indonesian government and how it's dealing with this pandemic. Sophisticated governments around the world, and Ian refers to the UK, with a lot more governmental experience and so on, are also struggling to get it right, and in the context of their own people, have a real trust dilemma as well. I'd just like to take this opportunity. Max put in a question regarding people, foreigners that want to come to Indonesia that are representing investments, PMAs. Max, this has been actually a subject that BritCham has discussed over the last few days. We also had a meeting with the head of BKPM just 2 days ago. BKPM will support the entry of senior executives where there is a very, very clear investment interest. So it's a case-by-case basis. I would say that they're fairly inundated and are struggling to handle the volume, but it can be done. If you don't have a Chamber of Commerce to refer to, if you'd like to have closer contact with ourselves, then do please get in touch, and we'll share with you how that works. Laura, you talked about the, okay, I think we agree now that the borders are going to remain closed. There is no logic at all, other than commercial gain, which could cause be like long-term suicide. There's no logic to those borders being open in the short term. You said that domestic travel is not picking up. It's still travel to and from international countries. What do you think the government should be doing to encourage domestic tourism? Do you believe they should encourage domestic tourism? Clearly Bali's screaming out. It's something like 89% currently of last year's level of total tourists. Difficult for that to go on, isn't it?
Yeah, it is very hard to sustain, especially for Bali, which fully depends on tourism. In my business, we still have the traveling of families from one country to the other country. But for Bali, I know the government is trying to support it, to reopen Bali again. And I think there are discussions I was talking to somebody in Bali today that they want to open it maybe after October, maybe in November or in December. But the problem that Bali was facing in the last weeks or last 2 months after they reopened for domestic tourism is that the rapid tests did not show good results. I mean, there is a 25% chance that you get the wrong result. So that resulted in an increase of COVID-19 cases again in Bali. And then people started to get worried. The problem is with this pandemic, it is so hard to control, not only for Indonesia, for all countries, even for Singapore, for the UK, for the United States, I mean, the biggest world power. So how are we, it is at this stage, I think we still have to focus on how can we flatten the curve? How can we stop the explosion of increasing cases, which we are seeing in Jakarta right now? So yes, domestic travel, we do need to promote it, of course. I mean, for my business would be good, but it is picking up very, very slowly. Some companies, they need to travel for work. I mean, things has to be done, but then you have the PCR test, the rapid test, everybody is worried about the health and hygiene protocols inside the hotels. So that is something that we need to start promoting as well. Having said that, I think in this case, still the health issue is the most important. We don't want to get sick. We stay away. I mean, personally, I stay away from many crowded places, but once you start traveling, you increase that risk of getting sick as well. And do we want to have a whole explosion of people traveling domestically and increasing the number of COVID cases? No, it's all about getting it down and keep on decreasing it to such a level that it can be controlled. And Indonesia still has difficulties to do that, as many other countries have.
Thanks, Laura. Health and safety protocols, Chris. I know you're not a domestic airline, but if more people are going to travel domestically, they've got to have trust in those health and safety protocols. But perhaps you'd just like to share with our audience to what extent Cathay Pacific has invested in protocols to improve trust and confidence and ensure safety.
So I was going to say that, you know, despite all the negatives of this situation, what it has allowed airlines to do is innovate in the way that we interact with customers. And obviously health is the most important factor at the minute. So we see a lot of airlines altering the way that they interact with customers, not just on the aeroplane, but in terms of, you know, whether you're having face-to-face conversations with ticketing officers at an airline's main office. So we've brought in a number of initiatives designed to protect not just passengers, but our own staff as well. And some of that is working with the airports in which we work. So trying to drive contactless check-in, contactless boarding, lots of e-gates and mobile boarding and things like that. And then there's the additional protocols that we've had to put in place. So mandatory temperature checks, face masks are mandatory on all of our flights. There's health forms that need to be filled out before you arrive in the various destinations. And then the real area where we've been able to instill confidence in passengers, I think, is in how we look after the aircrafts themselves. So there's been a lot of interest, for example, in whether COVID spreads easily on aeroplanes. And the data that we've seen suggests not, and that's related mainly to the cleaning that we do. So, you know, in very effective disinfectants at every leg of a flight, but also the filters that we use in the aircraft. So the air on an aircraft is changed every 2 minutes, and it's filtered to the same level that air is filtered in a hospital surgery. And then there's also methods of reducing contact with our own staff and customers. So changes in the way that we provide meals on flights and drinks, and making that a more, not self-service, but allowing the customers to have the contact with the serving elements rather than the staff, and trying to reduce that cross contact. And then the other point about, you know, away from the aircraft is things like the way we communicate with passengers. So we just recently launched in Indonesia the first local language WhatsApp service between an airline and customers. So instead of having to come in and book a ticket, or even having to pick up a phone and talk to someone, you can do it all on WhatsApp now. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this from Cathay in particular, as we innovate and find ways to serve customers and bring that confidence back in the health.
So it sounds like when this mobility does return, the whole experience is going to be a better, safer, more comfortable prospect for everybody, certainly in the context of airlines and Cathay Pacific. Andy, protocols, what types of changes have you had to embrace, and how many of them are likely to stay on a permanent basis as a more permanent change even afterwards?
Well, as I mentioned earlier on, we have initiated a further 175 standards audited by Lloyd's Register of London. So every hotel has been independently audited since they were implemented in April this year. So, you know, again, it goes back to that word trust. I mean, there are people that want to travel, and domestically we have COVID super sensitive, we have COVID cautious, and we have COVID fatigue. And there's a lot of COVID fatigue people in Jakarta that want to stay in hotels, and there's a lot of domestic customers that are still trying to use hotels as well. So, but putting that to one side, as a brand, our priority is to adhere to the hygiene and safety standards we have put in place, and also those that have been put in place by local government, to make sure we abide by those. That's very, very important. And on a more micro basis, I mean, it is important for us in areas like TripAdvisor, when we see guest feedback, commenting on our approach to hygiene and our colleagues' approach to hygiene and safety for the customer, because that builds confidence. And yes, I think there's a number of things, once we get through COVID, and the sooner we do, the better, obviously, there's going to be a number of things in relation to our approach to health, safety, hygiene, in relation to our relationships with each other. I think there's going to be a lot of positive stuff that comes out of this when we get through COVID. But from our perspective, going back to the question about domestic travel, just very briefly, I mean, if we looked at some of our properties in Europe, you know, they have been doing pretty well actually with domestic business in Italy and in Turkey. So as a company, you know, coming out of COVID in 2021 and into 2022, I think where we see the recovery is in the global leisure market, of which sadly Jakarta doesn't get any of it. But for our properties in Europe and in the States and some of the key cities like Paris, New York and London, that high yield leisure business is probably going to be the first to return, because I think corporate travel will still be restricted to a certain extent by travel restrictions and so on and so forth. So, but going back to the main point, health and hygiene remains of paramount of importance to protect our customers, to protect our staff, and also the integrity of the brand, something I referred to right at the beginning of this panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. There's a lot of innovation going on, Ian. The airline industry is clearly innovating its product and its service. Hotels are embracing international standards. Perhaps, though, it's your particular business subset that has the greatest opportunity to innovate and actually get going fastest, isn't it?
I think so, Chris. I mean, in many ways, what we're trying to do at the moment, I'd say our main role with Informa is really trying to bring two groups of people together in the safest environment as possible. So, you know, obviously at the moment, we're hoping that when things begin to open up, it really will be domestic and domestic. So domestic buyers with domestic suppliers, that's going to how it start. Then we will start to move to what we've deemed a sort of hybrid model, whereby we won't get the international participants coming in, but maybe there's a way for them to ship their products, to bring things actually to the trade show, where we can work perhaps with the British Chamber even closer, to have people on the ground generating leads for these customers and working that way. And then in time, we'll move to the full international mode. But in terms of innovation, I mean, we're looking at the virtual platforms. There's a lot we're doing now online to bring people together. I think this works quite well in certain sectors. We organize as Informa a lot of tech events. Tech is quite easy to get across on this virtual platforms. When it comes to more, goods which, and the sector I look after, which is more the food and hospitality side. I mean, the food sector is still going very strong. I mean, obviously retail and everything else, the hospitality sector is down, but how you replicate the touch, feel, smell that you would get at a physical trade show is very difficult to innovate. So this sector is quite hard. But there's lots going on. I think in terms of the shows themselves, I mean, like Chris and Andy alluded to, there's various safety measures that we will be implementing, and we are now for our trade shows in China. But one thing the events industry does have, which is good, is the test and trace system. Of course, we tend to know all the people coming in and traveling because we have them registered on our trade shows. So if there's any particular problems, unlike perhaps domestic tourists, we have access to all this data, so we know where everyone is. We often know which hotels they're staying in. We often know which airline they may have traveled with. So we have accesses to be able to do this, quite quickly. But we're looking at slightly wider aisles in the shows, the usual, the face masks, the sanitation procedures, the contactless, as Chris alluded to as well. This is a big area that we're innovating in as well now. So instead of before people filling in registration forms, either with the show and everything else, people will just get straight in and get onto the trade show floor. But we just need to get there first, Chris. I think that's the key at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, but for your particular business model, I know that you've stated a number of times in conversations that we've had, and I remember when you were in Indonesia. Of course, Indonesian exhibitions are rather more dependent upon domestic attendees rather than international attendees. So the outlook might be less gloomy if we solve Laura's problem of people feeling more trusting and more confident in our airlines and our hotels and the testing methods and so on.
I agree, and that's where China has taken the lead here on many of these, because the trade show industry is back there now. So it is domestic to domestic, but you're right, this is a huge part of the whole exhibition event, and the same for Indonesia. The amount of international visitors we get to an Indonesian trade show is relatively small compared to the shows we have in Singapore or Dubai or Hong Kong. It's going to be, they're going to be slower because they're more international in nature. But I think Indonesia can gain an advantage here because of the size of the domestic economy.
There's a very interesting question come in, and I thought it was a little bit random, but thinking about it and looking at the profile of the attendees, it's not so random at all, because what they have got are four executives that, if not already, are going to be into budgeting season very, very soon. The best part of 50% of our attendees are people who are going to have to do that either for themselves or and their own businesses, or on behalf of businesses for whom they're executives. I'd like to ask each of you, let's make the assumption that the borders will remain substantially closed, shall we say. Geographical mobility will be limited and restricted going into the first quarter of next year. How do you begin to plan your budget, and what do you factor in as being reasonable for 2021? I'm not going to pick on anyone. I'm going to invite one of you to go first. Oh, don't feel rushed.
Okay, I'll have a stab at this one, because we're right in the middle of this quagmire. Anyway, we don't see any substantial pickup to the middle of next year. So the first half is not looking particularly rosy. Putting the figures together, we're looking at historically our domestic-based business that we've had. I mean, we still, 2019, 39% of our business was domestic-based. Obviously, next year that percentage is going to go very, very high, but based on the lower annual occupancy. So we've looked at that as our base, and also the market segments that we work in, which the key segments obviously are group, our corporate negotiated, and then things like OTAs and package and so on and so forth. So we've been very, very cautious in our figures for the first half, and we see us going into, by Q4 next year, we hope to be getting into the black ink again at the profit level for the hotel. But and in food and beverage terms, We also see very soft the first half of the year. Our wedding inquiries are getting a lot stronger for next year, but very much Q3, Q4, and obviously the number of attendees is down historically. So look, I mean, it's not that there's no activity. It's just that there's a lot less activity, and as I say, we want to manage that, and also to manage our expenses and what our charges are to Mandarin Oriental and how we manage those, and as I say, protect the livelihood of our colleagues and obviously the integrity of the brand in terms of delivery of service, our standards of hygiene and safety, and obviously credibility. So I haven't given you too much information, but giving you a sort of gist, I think, of what we're doing here. Hopefully that'll be helpful.
So what you have said is you're going to be demanding a moratorium for 12 months from the Mandarin Oriental on their license fees. Thanks, Andy. I won't ask Laura this question. I would like Laura to address another question that's been asked after I've just had a response from Chris and Ian. And the question that I'll come to, Laura, is what else does the Indonesian government need to do now to foster international confidence in the measures that it's taking? So if you just want to have a think about that one. Ian, Informer's a huge group, a top 100 on the FTSE. How do you and does your company approach this budgeting 2021?
I mean, similar to Andy there, as I say, part of our business is not events, and that business, obviously, we've put more effort and resources into that, and that business is still very, very strong on the academic publishing side. So that business is good. I think in terms of the event side, which was the biggest part of the Informer Markets business, so it's a huge part of this. There's obviously two elements. From the revenue side, it's looking at what products and services we can offer our customers to bring people together and interact. And a lot of work is being done now around our data, about what products we can actually deliver. As I said, certain sectors, these virtual events can work quite well. The content we can deliver is quite good. The intelligence we can deliver. What is quite hard and difficult to replicate is this networking. And this is something now that we are trying to do that and put more effort into trying to make this come alive a little bit more. So that's what we're doing. Then on the cost side, I mean, in terms of the budgeting, we're pretty much for the shows in the first half of next year, we're really budgeting for no international travel. So those shows that are in Singapore, Hong Kong, where we're relying on more international travel, we've obviously had to bring these budgets down quite a lot. In markets, perhaps in Indonesia, that I mentioned before, where it's a bit more domestic in nature, we haven't been as ruthless in terms of dropping the cost there. Whilst, you know, alluding to what Andy said, making sure we maintain the reputation and the brands that we have of these shows, and also managing our staff and everything else, because these ultimately are our main resource in the service industry.
Thank you. And Chris, 1.2% of 12 months ago, and significantly increased costs in compliance, safety, and so on. You've invested heavily in that. What does it look like for Cathay Pacific?
Well, I did see the question flash up, and I was thinking that is a really tough question. And I think the simple answer is that being able to budget for next year is exceptionally difficult for an airline. You know, Andy, Ian, Laura have all made reference to the ability to use domestic trade shows or travel to have a kind of baseline of budget, and we don't have that. So we are entirely reliant on international travel. And I think the key word for Cathay is it's agility, and being able to flex that budget based on what happens with regards to government restrictions, travel bubbles, and vaccines. But the question asked what the baseline was, and I think it's you know, for us the baseline is pretty obvious. We will probably be using where we are now as the baseline for a lot of 2021, and we have a a prediction which is shared amongst the airline industry. I think that international travel will take probably into 2024 to recover to the levels that it was at in 2019. So we're looking at a curve to that point and a flexibility range dependent on numerous circumstances. So the simple answer is it's extremely difficult for us to budget for this.
So actually, the simple answer is there is no simple answer, is there? A very, very difficult question, but well put, and we understand why you did put it, Urfi Shifa. So Laura, a lot is going to come down to confidence at some stage. How does that confidence get built up in the context of confidence in the Indonesian government? And we need to be fairly brief with your answer, if you don't mind.
Yes, because we are running out of time.
Yeah.
I think to boost the international confidence is what Indonesia is doing right now, is taking the right approach in reinforcing the PSBB here in Jakarta, because most cases of COVID-19 are actually in Jakarta, the center of business as well. So as soon as that, the curve in Jakarta is being flattened and significantly reduced, I think that will boost the international confidence to start thinking of reopening the borders. I think the second step that has to be done is to get Indonesian people vaccinated. The vaccine is extremely important for people to feel confident among each other. So I think the first step is being taken right now. The second step is the vaccine. That still takes time because it's not ready yet. But Indonesia is in the trial phase with a Chinese company, so that is moving as well. So it's a matter of the next 6 months until March, which are very crucial. And I think after that, we have to see it. It may still be very difficult. Things may get worse. But I hope after March, things will slowly start to get better.
Okay, thank you very much. As I mentioned earlier, and before I hand back to Sonny to do a closing wrap on the 10th anniversary of Professional Women's Group, as we mentioned, Chris is now situated in Hong Kong and preparing to, or has handed over to his successor in Indonesia, who's Matthew Choi. And as Cathay is the airline partner of the British Chamber of Commerce in Indonesia, we'd like to give Chris the opportunity of formally introducing Matthew to us briefly. Chris.
Yeah, so Matthew has worked at Cathay for 9 years, I think, in a variety of different roles within Hong Kong. He is still in Hong Kong at the minute. We are hopefully close to getting him the ability to get down to Jakarta, but we have discussed a lot about the relationship with Britcham, and I know that he's very keen to keep that relationship going and help support the network. Matthew, say anything to introduce yourself?
Sure, and thank you for introducing me, Chris and Chris. I'm indeed incoming country manager for Indonesia. Just got on board last week. Coming from my previous role working in the customer experience area, focusing on the food and beverage. So I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of comments, good comments, hopefully, fingers crossed, from the group over here. And for sure, glad to be an airline partner for Britcham. And I know Chris is a close friend to many of you here. So for sure, I have some big shoes to fill. And I'm still in Hong Kong waiting for the visa. So indeed, this opening of border topic is very close to my heart. So hopefully I'll be able to get into to Jakarta as soon as possible and see each and every one of you face to face.
Well, welcome, Matthew. And of course, you are so lucky, aren't you? Because according to Chris, the only way is up. You're coming in at the right time.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering whether Andy Abraham, with his 50 with his 50% female team, would like to introduce his successor to us.
Not yet. Not yet. Anyway.
All right. From me to each of you, Chris, Ian, Andy, and Laura, thank you very much for joining me. Before Sonny does her wrap, I'd just like to say, Sonny, we have got a very high percentage of non-members come and joined us today. So let's please warm them up to join the Britcham community, eh? Over to you, Sonny.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, everyone. And since there was so much talk about domestic And I totally agree, since Indonesia has been banned by 59 countries, we really need to focus on the domestic market. And I would just like to share briefly my personal experience. I was in Bali from August 20 till September 7. And I went to Bali exactly 6 months. The last time I was there was February 20, and I was in Bali. I went on August 17th. So August 20th, I was in the same hotel that I stayed in February. But unfortunately, the hotel was shut, and I could only stand there at the car park. And I was so sad to see that, and to see the beaches deserted, everything closed. Some restaurants were open, some were shut. But I think that I was trying to see the positives and to also enjoy the quiet and the peacefulness. So I would recommend those of you who are taking precautions and feel safe to be alone and to enjoy quiet and, nature. It's a perfect time to actually travel to Bali. The flight left on time. In fact, my flight left 30 minutes earlier and landed in Bali 30 minutes earlier. So I see that as positives. Plus, I was out of the airport in less than 10 minutes. So it was so quick. And it took only 30 minutes to get to the airport in Jakarta. And same, there are no more traffic jams. There is no more queues. It is really heartbreaking on one side, but you can have the positives on the other side. And if you stay in places where you can have some trust, which is very important, trust and safety. And I only traveled in friends' cars or in Bluebirds. No offense, because I didn't trust the apps. I don't want to be in cars where I don't know the people, but somehow I thought Bluebird must be maintaining a certain safety standard. Or I walked everywhere, and it was beautiful, fresh air, and if you like being alone, I was at Seminyak Beach at 11 a.m. and there was only 5 of us on the beach. And I was also on another day in a beach in Sanur at 3 p.m. and again, there was only 3 of us at the beach. And that is really, in one side, heartbreaking, but on the other side, you can enjoy the nature and enjoy the quiet and have some quality time. So I think if we choose well and we plan our trip, it's actually possible to do domestic travel and support, the restaurants and the few hotels which are open. It really, really is heartbreaking to see the effect it has had. And most of the shops are shut, so it's really, and most of the restaurants are still shut. So let's support the domestic market, and let's actually keep wearing the mask and keep doing what the protocol requires us to do, so that we make other people feel safe. When we wear the mask, it's not just to protect ourselves, but it's to protect others. And for that, I think if we can stay that way and maintain the protocols, we will also make other people feel comfortable around us. So let's hope that the domestic market picks up. I hope that in December, which is when usually people travel for Christmas, that at least we see the domestic market picking up so that the hotels, the restaurants can actually have some business again. And also for the retail. And then as for international, I think we still have a little bit of longer time because we have had so many countries banning us. And I think it will require a lot more work. But domestically, there is no reason why we can't step up and try to contribute in some way. Yeah, I felt safe throughout, and I'm very grateful I had the opportunity to travel. And I would go again if I had the opportunity. And thank you very much, everyone. As Chris said, the Professional Women Group has been in existence for 10 years. And we do have a lot of events. The BritCham is the most active chamber online. So please do look up our website. Please join our webinars, which are free of charge. And please do support us, join us. We bring you all the topics that are relevant and that are important. And for November, we have a very exciting lineup as we are going to have a webinar with 3 panelists, 3 women panelists who have been awarded Women Entrepreneur Awards by IWAC, which is an international women empowerment community. And the three women are Shinta Kamdani, Inke Maris, and Ibu Prita Kamalgani. And if you'd like to know more, please join us in November. The event might be for women only. We'll see. Let's see. We still have 2 months on this. So, but please join us and please become members of BritCham. And thank you once again for your support and see you very soon. Goodbye, everyone.